Every single year, Atlantic hurricanes tear apart the American coastline, and every single year, nearly a third of the money used to rebuild all those wrecked homes and businesses, it comes from a tiny island that doesn't even have its own drinking water. That island is Bermuda, 21 square miles total, barely bigger than Manhattan. Now, most people just assume Bermuda is somewhere in the Caribbean. It's not. Bermuda sits completely alone in the middle of the North Atlantic. The nearest land is the American coast, about 650 miles to the west. Head east from there, and you've got nothing but open ocean all the way to Africa. So how does a place this small and this isolated become one of the wealthiest spots on the entire planet? That's exactly what we're going to find out. To figure that out, we need to rewind, because it turns out the whole secret behind this island's wealth starts way back with the ancient geological forces that built the place from the ground up. Out in the vast North Atlantic, Bermuda is truly alone. No neighbors, no nearby islands, nothing. And here's something most people don't know about it. What you're actually looking at is the tip of an ancient volcano. The mountain underneath goes nearly 15,000 feet straight down to the ocean floor. It's been dead and submerged for millions of years. But here's what makes the geology really weird. The island's surface was built up almost entirely from ancient fossilized coral reefs, and the coral reef is basically like a sponge. When rain falls on Bermuda, it doesn't collect anywhere. It just seeps straight through the ground and mixes with the salt water below. No rivers, no natural lakes, no fresh water whatsoever. For a tiny island sitting in the middle of the ocean, that's a brutal situation to be in. What saved the island was something called the Gulf Stream, a powerful, warm current that flows up from the tropics and wraps around Bermuda, keeping it green and subtropical year-round. But that same warmth is also what feeds massive hurricanes. And for centuries, Bermuda has sat directly in their path. The shallow coral reefs surrounding the island have wrecked and sunk more than 225 ships over the years. So when Spanish sailor Juan de Bermudez stumbled across the island in 1505, he found it completely empty. And honestly, the vibe was not great. Ships kept getting smashed on the reefs, and every night survivors heard blood-curdling screams coming out of the forest. Nobody stuck around. Sailors named it the Isle of Devils and got out of there as fast as they could. Turns out those screams were just the native cahao bird calling for a mate, mixed in with grunting from wild pigs that had been left behind by passing ships. Not exactly terrifying in hindsight, but for 16th century sailors in the dark, yeah, absolutely nightmare fuel. Bermuda didn't get its first settlers through some grand colonial plan. It got them because of a shipwreck. In 1609, a British ship called the Sea Venture was hauling 150 people toward the American colonies. Midway through the trip, a massive hurricane hit. The ship started taking on water fast. It was going down. And right there, the captain made a decision that sounds completely insane. Instead of letting the ship sink in open water, he deliberately steered it straight into Bermuda's reef. On purpose. And somehow, it worked. The ship was destroyed, but every single person on board survived. Now these 150 people were stranded on what everyone called the Devil's Island for 10 months. And they didn't just sit around. Using timber salvaged from the wreck and wood from local trees, they built 2 brand new ships from scratch. When the ships were ready to go, something unexpected happened. Some people flat out refused to leave. After months on the island, they'd realized it wasn't some cursed hellhole. It was actually clean, warm, and genuinely pleasant to live on. England took notice and officially claimed Bermuda as a colony in 1612. But then the settlers hit the same wall immediately. No fresh water. To survive, they came up with an architectural solution so clever, it's still being used today. They built tiered, stepped rooftops out of local limestone and painted them bright white. The steps slow the rainwater down as it flows across the surface. The white paint filters out contaminants and reflects heat. The clean water then runs through gutters and down into underground storage tanks. So those gorgeous white rooftops you see all over Bermuda, not a style thing, a survival thing. And it's still the law today. Every building in Bermuda is required by law to have one of these systems. covering at least 80% of the roof. That rule hasn't changed in 400 years. From around 1612 to 1684, the settlers gave farming a shot. It bombed. The soil was too thin, the land too small, and the whole freshwater situation made growing anything consistently basically impossible. So they pivoted hard and went to sea. Bermudians started building ships, trading salt, and getting into privateering, which is the fancy 18th century way of saying state-licensed piracy. With official permission from the British Crown, they were legally allowed to attack and loot enemy vessels. For most of the 1700s, Bermuda was essentially a community of very well-connected legal pirates. When that era started winding down in the 1800s, Bermuda didn't crash. Instead, they played a card that almost no other colony had: serious political freedom. Bermuda's official status today is British Overseas Territory. Not fully independent, but they've had their own parliament since 1620, one of the oldest in the world. They have their own prime minister. They write their own domestic laws. Britain just handles defense and foreign affairs and pretty much stays out of everything else. And that freedom to make their own rules, that's exactly what they cashed in on. Bermuda wiped out corporate income tax entirely for foreign companies. For wealthy American business owners, the math was just too good to ignore. Why set up your company in the US and hand a big chunk of your profits over to the IRS when you could put your company's official address in Bermuda, just 650 miles off the coast, pay zero tax, and still run your whole operation from your office in New York? Your money stays whole. Bermuda gets the fees, the prestige, and the economic activity. Everybody wins. Well, except the IRS. That combination completely flipped Bermuda's story. The isolated little pirate island quietly became a global financial center. In a lot of ways, it's not that different from Singapore, a tiny island with no natural resources that got filthy rich by making itself the most attractive place in the region for wealthy people to park and grow their money. But Bermuda isn't just a tax haven. Over time, it carved out something way more specific. It became the global headquarters for reinsurance, which is basically insurance for insurance companies. Here's how it works. Say a major hurricane obliterates a city in America. Hundreds of thousands of homes are gone. The local insurance companies now owe money to basically everyone at the same time. If they have to pay all those claims out of their own reserves, they go under. And then the people who actually need the money get nothing. So those insurance companies buy their own insurance from Bermuda. When a catastrophe hits, Bermuda's reinsurance firms step in and cover roughly a third of the total losses. Most of the world's biggest catastrophe reinsurance companies are headquartered right in Hamilton, Bermuda's capital. And it's not just the US doing this. China does it too. China's government-backed insurers know that provinces like Sichuan and Yunnan sit on some of the most earthquake-prone land on Earth. So they set up a special company in Bermuda to issue their first-ever catastrophe bond called Panda Re. Through Bermuda's capital markets, they raised $50 million from investors specifically to cover earthquake risk back on the Chinese mainland. The numbers involved are genuinely hard to wrap your head around. Right now, there are 1,239 insurance companies officially registered under Bermuda's regulatory authority, managing a total premium value that hit $316 billion in 2023. And when Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria hammered the American coast back-to-back in 2017, companies based in Bermuda covered around 30% of all disaster recovery claims. That's roughly $30 billion coming out of a 21-square-mile island. None of this is guesswork either. Bermuda specifically recruits top climate scientists, meteorologists, and data analysts from around the world. Their whole job is to build advanced mathematical models that predict when a storm will hit, where it's going, and how much damage it's going to do. By the time a hurricane actually makes landfall, Bermuda has already done the math on exactly what it's going to cost. Here's where things get kind of wild. Right now, the planet is warming. Ocean temperatures are rising. Storms are getting more intense. more frequent, and more destructive than anything in recorded Atlantic history. By all logic, that should be terrible news for Bermuda. More destruction means more claims to pay out. More claims means the money runs out faster. The whole model should be unraveling, but the opposite is happening. As weather gets harder to predict, insurance companies everywhere are getting nervous. Nobody wants to be the one left holding the bill when the next Category 5 rolls through, so they're all rushing to offload their risk to Bermuda. And because everyone needs Bermuda, Bermuda gets to charge more for the service. The worse things get out there in the world, the better business gets in Hamilton. The wild part is that Bermuda itself is sitting right in the middle of all this. Hurricane Fabian hit the island directly in 2003 and caused hundreds of millions of dollars in damage. Hurricane Ernesto came back for another hit in 2024, but Bermuda was essentially built to take it. The buildings are constructed to handle ferocious winds. The freshwater reserves are sealed off from floodwater. Power gets restored within hours after a direct hit. Now a different kind of pressure is building, and this one isn't coming from the sky. Major governments around the world have gotten fed up watching corporations shelter billions in offshore tax havens. After years of international pressure, Bermuda finally agreed to play ball. Starting in 2025, they introduced a 15% corporate tax on companies pulling in more than about $830 million a year. But look, this isn't the end of Bermuda's story. It's just the next chapter. This island has been adapting and reinventing itself for over 400 years. Pivoting to new rules is just the latest version of something they've always been good at. It's the same survival instinct that made a ship captain smash his vessel into a reef rather than go down in open water. Still, for all the wealth Bermuda has generated, actually living there is rough because the island produces almost nothing on its own. Basically, everything has to be shipped in from hundreds of miles away across open ocean. Fuel, food, lumber, cars, all of it imported. And the flood of global finance executives moving in has pushed property prices through the roof. In the end, Bermuda's story is about defiance. A place that by every geographical measure shouldn't have worked, isolated, waterless, and directly in the path of the world's most powerful storms, turned all of that into an extraordinary engine of wealth. But sitting right underneath that success is a quiet irony. The island that sells protection from catastrophic risk to the rest of the world has never quite managed to protect its own people from the storm of an unaffordable life.